Today, Julie White is presenting, aka Miss 4, aka JP Dub. Julie moved into this.
Some hand signals or something.
Julie moved into the MS4 coordinator position in June of 2021, last year, and she's already done incredible work here, building on our relationship with the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality and coordinating already just huge updates to the city's plan on how we comply with state rules. And we're going to learn a lot more about that today. She'll give us an overview of the external regulatory framework that governs a lot of what we do in watershed protection and even in other parts of the City of Austin organization. We'll learn about the basics of the Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System permit, that's the MS4 permit, and Total Maximum Daily Load program, the TMDL program. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Julie, and take it away.
Thank you, Ryan. Thanks, you guys, for joining today. Okay, gonna go right into it. I'm gonna start with a little history about the Clean Water Act, everyone's favorite topic of regulations. So before 1972, there were rivers on fire and dead zones in Lake Erie and fish kills and not many regulations on wastewater treatment plants. So Congress recognized this and created a structure for regulating these wastewater discharges and pollutant discharges. And it gave EPA the authority to implement programs so they can issue permits. So that was part of the act in 1972. And following that, Congress recognized there was a problem, a stormwater problem. And they defined industrial stormwater discharges and separate storm sewer systems as point source discharges. So that allowed them to have stormwater programs and issue permits for those pollutants. So that's where we get our MS4 permit, which is known as in the phase 1 rule. So those are medium and large MS4s. And whenever this rule started, it was large cities with populations over 100,000 people. They were required to develop a program. So we fell into that, and our first permit was issued with the EPA in 1992. So following that, the TCEQ, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, assumed that program from the EPA. So it was formerly the NPDES program, or National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, Texas Pollution Discharge Elimination System. So those are the water quality permitting programs of the state and federal government. So in 2001, the TCEQ also took over the multi-sector general permit, which is an industrial stormwater permit for manufacturing facilities within the state. Following that, the construction general permit was issued by the TCEQ. And in 2006, I guess there was like a period of time for the permit with the EPA to expire, and then we obtained our first permit with the city under the phase 1 rule. So there was a group of large cities at that time that obtained that permit. And following that, the phase 2 general permits, the TCEQ decided would be the way they permit all new cities that might even fall under those urbanized or large population areas. So they have this general permit for phase 2 cities that they now issue for anyone. The urbanized areas, now the definition is changed with the Census Bureau, and it's based on a housing unit density and population of at least 10,000. So any of those densities over 10,000 have to get a phase 2 general permit. So we still are kind of grandfathered in under this individual permit that we have with the state. As I mentioned, it's a population-triggered regulatory permit to reduce pollutant discharges into our stormwater conveyances. That's essentially the definition of an MS4. It's our conveyances of stormwater into our creeks and rivers. So as part of that permit, we're required to develop a stormwater management program. I refer to it as a SWMP. You'll hear people use different terms. I like SWMP because it doesn't sound like SWMP or SWIP, which is a plan for other permits. So within that program, there are 8 minimum control measures, or otherwise known as MCMs. I know there's a lot of acronyms, and I definitely use them. So I'm going to try to stay on top of explaining those as we go along. So within those MCMs, minimum control measures, we have to have measurable goals. They have to be quantifiable now and measurable. So it's a new commitment for us as MS4s to develop these. So as part of this program, we're also may have periodic audits by the TCEQ or the EPA. Even though TCEQ administers the permit, the EPA still can do inspections at any time of any of our permitted programs through the TCEQ. So just to distinguish between the two, the MS4 permit is on the left. That's our front page. It's issued by the state, and that defines everything that must be done by a permittee within our SWMP. So our MS4 permit is written by the state, and then the SWMP is written by us and approved by the state, but it is specific to our city. And we just have to include everything that's required by the permit. So I'm just distinguishing because sometimes those words can be interchangeable for people, and I just wanted to separate them. So this is our permit number that we've had for many years, and it's a 5-year term. We're currently in 2018 to 2023. We're in year 4. We report by fiscal year to the TCEQ within our annual report. That's due on May 1st of every year. Every 5 years, we submit a renewal application. It's a pretty intense process, and that's supposed to be turned into them 180 days before. So the end of 2022, I'll be working on that renewal. And often I hear that it's a Watershed Protection Department permit, and it's not. It's a citywide permit, and there's a lot of different departments that participate in the permit. There's a lot that do, more work than others. Like Austin Water has a lot of huge parts of sections within our permit. Within Watershed, historically, we've always managed the permit and coordinated it, but it is a city permit. So our main goal for the MS4 is to prohibit non-stormwater discharges from entering our MS4. So that's anything that isn't stormwater. It's often thought of as processed water or any water that's not rain or litter or anything like that. There are a lot of allowable non-stormwater discharges, on the other hand, like air conditioning, condensate, or firefighting activity water. So the goal is to reduce to the maximum extent practicable. That is one of those terms that's pretty subjective, that's used in regulations. But the intent of this is that you can't completely eliminate pollutants from discharges, but our goal is to reduce it to the maximum extent practicable. Another word they use a lot is when and where feasible. Okay, so I'm going to go through each of the minimum control measures, or MCMs. This is not comprehensive of everything that's in our SWMP because we do have a large program, but I'm just trying to hit on each of the things that we normally include in our annual report every year. Our stormwater control measures, inspection and maintenance program, that's what Matt talked about a couple weeks ago, the pond inspection and maintenance program. Also included in that is Barton Spring Zone permitting and dam safety program, and inspections is in that group too. Open waterway inspections, that's our open creeks and streams, and keeping those, conducting inspections of those regularly, and that maintenance, we report on that within our annual report. How many miles that have been inspected, maybe. The closed system are culverts and bridges, TV inspection of lines, vegetation and debris management is another program within the field ops group, and floatables as well. So you can see this picture here. That's one of our large boom that we have as West Bolden Creek enters Ladybird Lake. We have 2 of these BMPs, best management practices. The other one is on Shoal Creek. So you can see that they do catch a lot of debris. So they regularly inspect and maintain these and do additional inspections following a rain event. Also within MCM1, Austin Resource Recovery manages their litter control program. So this is everything from our curbside, trash, brush, household, large waste to all of the litter units or trash units over the city downtown area. We report on how much is obtained, dead animals, everything like that. They also clean all of the streets within the city. This is one of their units. Be aware it could be loud when it comes on. So this is following, they had a hydraulic line break on one of their trucks, and they came out and applied oil dry and then cleaned it up. I think it's a pretty impressive unit. Just keep your fingers away from the blower. So MCM2 is a post-construction stormwater control measures. That's SCM. In this section, we display that we've implemented development review processes, and we have a comprehensive planning process throughout the city and have ordinances in place to enforce all of these requirements. Housing and Planning Department is HPD, and Development Services Department is DSD. So they have goals within this section, along with Watershed Protection, where we've committed to evaluating SCMs to address water quality and erosion and flooding issues. And this is also where we report on our dam inspection. I think we have 33 dams that we inspect annually, and the Barton Springs Zone Plan Review. MCM3 is Illicit Discharge Detection and Elimination Program. So there's a huge section within this that we lay out our response to any IDDEs and our enforcement procedures within Watershed and Austin Water. And some of the goals that we commit to for Austin Water are for overflows and infiltration. So they have two separate programs. The wastewater pipeline, wastewater infrastructure, that's all of our city lines, and then also the on-site septic facility, known as OSSF commonly. Within the septic facility program, they conduct inspections and complaint response. Those are not found within all areas of the city, but they also have an enforcement program. Also, the wastewater infrastructure group. So they have emergency response timelines that they commit to. They try to get to them within 24 hours. They also do inspections of lines, TV lines, smoke tests, as you can see in this picture here. That's an example of smoke testing. And they also inspect their lift stations. So it's the goal of this is to prevent any leaks or discharges into our system. Austin Resource Recovery was formerly referred to as the HHW, or Household Hazardous Waste Facility. Now it's the Recycle and Reuse Drop-Off Center. We report this as part of our MS4 permit because what the goal of this is to keep any of these items from entering our streams, from dumping any of this waste. So they accept household hazardous waste such as batteries and any paint, motor vehicle fluids, all from residential properties or from citizens. They don't accept waste from businesses. Also part of this program, Watershed and AFD have a spill prevention and response programs. They often overlap for hazmat incidents. On the left, this is what most people think of for spill response, I guess, like an oil spill and applying absorbent and cleaning that up. So depending on the size of it, Watershed does it, or AFD, or both together. The picture on the right is an example of where both departments respond together. There, more frequently than you would think, there are fires in trash trucks. And so they have to find a big parking lot to pull over into and dump everything out. AFD comes, puts the fire out. They call Watershed, and we respond to make sure there wasn't any impact to a nearby creek. AFD is pretty good about putting out boom to prevent anything from entering the storm sewer. In this picture, there's a forklift that was able to spread out the dump material in order to put the fire out. So Watershed also responds to a lot of different complaints that we receive from our hotline, sanitary sewer overflows. A lot of those come from requests from Austin Water. Watershed works closely with Austin Water on overflows. Pool discharges, citizen complaints. Here's an example of a really huge, crazy water line break. So you can see this was just a field. It was not a huge pond. So that is a huge eroded area. And so the pollutants from water line breaks are chlorine and suspended sediment. MCM4s are pollution prevention for municipal operations. So this includes an inspection program. Watershed, through water quality compliance, does inspections of our municipal operations and helps out to make sure that they're in compliance with waste handling and storage. And then each department that has municipal operations like Fleet, PARD, Austin Water, they have to implement a training program that we report on to the TCEQ within our annual report on, how we handle waste and how we prevent pollutants from discharging off-site when it rains. Also within this section is the Integrated Pest Management Program. So there's kind of a dual side to this program. There's education and outreach to the public, training for landscape professionals, but then also the Grow Green group and the IPM group work with employees at municipal operations to make sure that pest treatment is being done responsibly and applied as required. MCM5 is the industrial and high-risk runoff. This is mostly an inspection program for industrial facilities. So AFD they permit all above ground hazardous materials and they do inspections of those sites. And then DSD, Development Services, permits underground storage tanks. They go out to new installs and then they have, an inventory of all of their USTs that have been installed and conduct inspections of those. Watershed within water quality compliance has an industrial facility permitting and inspection program as well. It's any facility that stores or handles waste oil, typically auto shops, auto salvage. They also permit fueling facilities. Another program that they manage is the multi-sector general permit, that industrial permit that I talked about earlier that the TCEQ administers. So Watershed conducts inspections of that program of facilities that are permitted or need a permit. We don't have enforcement authority. It is a state permit, but we try to work with facilities to get compliance. So there's a lot of different facilities that fall under this, not just chemical plants and concrete batch plants. This on the right is an example of a facility that needed a industrial stormwater permit. This is a super duper stinky water coming into this pond from this culvert at an industrial park. There's a view of it through the storm sewer grate. Just a real gunky mess. And surprise, it's carrots. And there were beets and the water was red and zucchinis. And so food manufacturing falls under those industrial facilities. I saw your question there, Anna, about restaurants. That doesn't fall under there. Those aren't like manufacturing. This is mostly for like products that are made and sold maybe in a grocery store or something. Restaurants are permitted, like their grease traps are permitted by Austin Water, and they have an inspection program for those as well too, the industrial users. So DSD is the loan department in the construction site runoff, MCM6, and they conduct routine inspections and complaint inspections. They also, part of their commitment within the swamp is to do pre-construction meetings so that they provide educational material to the contractors. So the left is a silt fence, typical failing silt fence. On the right, that is drill mud. It's a little less common, but a super messy construction discharge that occurs occasionally. That's not supposed to, but So the education group is a program. Watershed historically has been the leader in managing a lot of different programs within our swamp. And you can see the many examples here. This is just a few of their programs. Recently, Austin Resource Recovery, ARR, and Austin Water also have made commitments within the swamp. You can see here this one piece from Austin Resource Recovery about batteries. Batteries are often the cause of some of these fires in trash trucks. And Austin Resource Recovery has had some trucks damaged from such fires. Monitoring programs, I'm sorry, I got to get this laser off or I'm going to be like zooming it everywhere. Are solely under Watershed Protection. We are the loan department that commits to these programs. Wet weather screening, that's something that I do following a rain event to see if there's any indications of illicit discharges. Dry weather is under water quality compliance. Those are screenings done during dry weather to look for any flows that are not rain. Storm event monitoring, that's conducted at 4 outfalls during permit years 1 and 4 of our 5-year permit term. Also within that monitoring program is baseline chemical, physical, and biological monitoring, which is on a rotating basis every other year, and monitoring of the Barton Springs pool complex. So here's Andrew conducting monitoring for our biological monitoring program, and the right is a example of a storm event that might be monitored. This is one of our special people that manages our storm event monitoring. You can see him 30 years later still keeping up with his equipment. So we're going to change gears to the TMDL program. The TMDL, total maximum daily load, it tells us, it's like a pollutant budget. It tells us the greatest amount of a particular substance that a waterway can receive and still support its assigned use, which for all of our TMDLs in the city, the substance is bacteria and its assigned use is recreational. Monitoring data is collected by the TCQ and also submitted to the TCQ from the city or local authorities. And then the TCQ identifies any impaired water bodies that don't meet these water quality standards and puts them on a 303D list. TCQ then will develop a TMDL. This is done through data collection and analysis in a watershed. It's a document that includes comprehensive information about the watershed, such as land use, any discharge facilities within that watershed, and monitoring data. It's a huge document. That's just a few things that's included. Gonna go through a little timeline short here. So in the past, stakeholders such as MS4 operators, community groups, environmental groups would meet to develop an implementation plan or an I plan. This has always been facilitated by the TCEQ, and it's been a set of voluntary strategies to achieve the goal of pollution reduction. So the plan is adopted by the TCEQ, approved by the EPA. It's a 5-year plan, and then each year the group meets to see if any revisions are necessary. So currently, TMDL measures are now required to be in our SWMP. So the SWMP is part of the MS4 permit, so that makes them regulatory measures now. So it kind of changes the dynamic of what an MS4 commits to, since it's not voluntary any longer. The I-plan can also, the I-plan process still goes on. There's still stakeholders. We're in a process right now with one of our I-plans for revision, but we have submitted our TMDL measures in November within our SWMP because we are required to submit an amended SWMP. And with that, we needed to submit our TMDL measures. So I'll talk about that a little more in a little bit. What makes that weird in the future, I don't know what that process looks like, because the I-plan stakeholder group and the SWMP submittal is not always on the same timeline. So we might commit to our TMDL measures as an MS4 outside of that stakeholder process. We have 5 impaired water bodies within the city. Bicewood, tributary of Shoal, Walnut, Taylor Slough South, and Waller are all on one TMDL together, and Gilliland is on a separate TMDL. These are all impaired for bacteria and recreational use. So you can see Gilliland Creek here. The blue is the city of Austin jurisdiction area. You can see we don't have a lot of jurisdiction within this area. This the TMDL was approved by the EPA in 2009. So this one was, I think we're on our second I-plan for this TMDL. We also submitted our measures within our SWMP in November. So the 4 streams was adopted in 2015. We just had one 5-year period of that plan expired in 2020, and that's currently under revision right now with the adoption in 2022, we hope. Good news is we are making some progress on some of those streams. So within that swamp, we submitted these control measures. Some of these things are things we've historically done. We've committed to a timeline of our wastewater infrastructure inspections, and which includes TV and lines to see if there's any leaks or any lines that need to be repaired that might be introducing bacteria into our systems. We also have commitments through our residential education group, if they're with the Stop the Blob program, if there's a sanitary sewer overflow at an apartment complex that might be caused by grease, they provide educational material to residents. We have new commitments to homeless encampments, mostly through the Walnut Watershed for portable toilets. And we've also committed to more monitoring within these streams for determining sources of bacteria. All right, changing gears. Obviously, I manage the swamp. I submit that to the TCQ, make sure it's being implemented, work on the annual report. Another thing is that I try to benchmark with a lot of other cities to, not recreate the wheel and work together to kind of exchange information. And I also will handle any audits and gather that information if that is to occur. I've been helping out with the wastewater permit application monitoring, as any permits go through the TCEQ. We see if any of those might affect our watersheds. So some of the challenges that we may encounter with this program is balancing of commitments, because for a swamp, you have to, if you take anything out, you have to replace it with something equal or better. We have to be careful with not overcommitting in case we have a year where we have budget shortfalls or short-staffed, or there's a pandemic or a flood or anything like that. So we have to manage our commitments. All the while, the TCQ does want us, and as a city, we want to continually improve, but we don't always get more resources to do that, right? So we have to balance those together. Measuring BMP performance is important for the permit, because if something isn't working, we're supposed to replace it with a better BMP. That's challenging, especially for some of the non-point source discharges. Monitoring is an obvious solution for some of this, but that also is time consuming and expensive. So influencing human behavior, that's a huge part of this permit, is education to the public and asking them to do their part. So that's always challenging. And TCEQ, there's still a lot of approvals from the EPA, and just sometimes it's taken a while for us to get approval of our submittals. So it puts us a little bit behind. So I don't actually know the person in this picture, but I was trying to think of what is challenging. And I think having a baby is challenging, and maybe a backcountry trip is challenging. And so I thought about putting those together, and sure enough, the internet delivered.